Kid Young, welcome to An Actor Despairs. How are you doing, man?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you very much for having me, Ryan. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's really good to have you, and I'm really glad we could rock this out, man. You're doing incredible work over there, and I mean, you're getting to do Shakespeare film and TV, and you got to go to RADA, man. It's a hell of a career you're having, and it must feel
Thank
really
you very
good
much.
to. And you got Shadow and Bone season 2 coming up, so your
hmm
2023 is looking great, man. I'm just thrilled for you.
Thank you very much. It's an absolute pleasure. When you say it like that, actually, yeah, it's been a long run of stuff. So I feel very very blessed to kind of keep doing, what I love, what we all love. So yeah,
It's
no, it's a real pleasure, man.
it's kind of one of those things when I'm an actor as well. Like we're actors when we're in it, we're so in it, and it's not till later that we get to look back and be like, wow, that was crazy.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the thing that I always say is that when you're working, whether it's in theatre, film, TV, or even just training, like the days are very, very long, but the weeks go like that,
Yeah.
and it really zips by. So when you kind of take a moment to look back on it, it's actually pretty crazy.
Well, let's take a moment, and that leads right into what I usually do. Let's look back. Where did you grow up?
Okay, yeah. So I grew up in Oxfordshire in England. For those of you who don't know, that's about an hour and a half in the car west of London.
Would that be a
And
suburb for the Americans listening, or is that London still?
yeah, yeah. I was in the suburbs, kind of just outside the Oxford city centre, where the esteemed university is. So I kind of grew up in the suburbs, and I was in school locally around there. And yeah, I mean, I kind of grew up around there, and I was one of the drama kids. And
So
so I
where
loved kind of
did,
doing all the school.
if you don't mind, we'll
Mhm.
break it down even slower than that. Where did that
Yeah, let's do that.
get started? Are your parents artists?
My parents are creative people, but they're not professional artists. My mother works in travel, and my father works in engineering. So I'm the eldest of three, and so I was kind of the first to try and make a career of this kind of creative life.
And
Um,
where did that
yeah,
impetus come from, and what was the journey like getting into it? And if you don't
I
mind
think
me
yeah.
asking, what age are we talking about when it really started being explored?
Listen, dude, I was super super young. Like from the age of like 3 or 4, I wanted to at least perform, right? I don't think I had the consciousness to know that I wanted to be an actor or what that really was. But I started doing like youth performance arts groups and stuff. I wanted to be a dancer and a singer and an actor, and I also played music. I played the piano and the guitar, and I started with the horn and the trombone. But like I kind of I wanted to be out there doing stuff, and
Yeah.
it's a great way for like kids to also meet each other um socially, because I think for us in the UK we call it football, you might call it soccer, but
Yeah.
there's all sorts of like sports teams and so on, all these ways to like kids to connect. And for me that was in like a theater kind of concept, in that kind of forum. um and so when I was about, I don't know, even from the age of like 5 and 6, I was just learning and getting to hang out with kids, whether you were singing a song from a famous piece of musical theatre, or whether you were doing a dance piece, or even trying to look at a scene. My first kind of proper professional acting jobs when I was a kid in the ensemble. I didn't really know what was going on around me, but that started from when I was about 8 or 9. Um, and that was me doing the kind of local pantomime in Oxford, which is a big thing in the UK. Maybe not so much outside, but it's like a Christmas show that is
Yeah.
normally based on a fairy tale. Um, and so that was kind of my start, where I was kind of seasonally around the Christmas period. I would be half in school and half out of school doing these shows, and that was my first flavor of this whole thing. And being like, you know what, maybe I want to do this.
Yeah.
And also just watching movies as a kid. I think the first movie that really made me pay attention as a kid was my dad showed me The Empire Strikes Back, and I think I actually saw Empire Strikes Back before I saw the original Star Wars, and that was the first movie I saw where I went,
Empire Strike
oh
Back's
wait,
second, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
dude, come on.
yeah,
Yeah, of course
yeah,
it is. Yeah, but I saw that movie, and I remember thinking like, oh wait, that isn't just like an escaped world or whatever that you can go to, but like that's someone's job,
yeah,
and like realizing that, you know, you've seen people have lightsaber fights, whatever it is, and kind of going like, that's someone's actual job. Someone spends their life doing this, making this stuff, and I kind of really wanted to kind of know more about it. But for a long time, it was just, you know, it was like an extracurricular kind of like hobby, right? Like it's kind of the thing you do after school or on the weekends. It wasn't until my teenage years where it was like, oh wait, this actually might be my thing.
yeah.
Um, and that you know, that was interesting because also I'm sure, I don't know whether you have the same thing, but for a lot of kind of young guys that I know, part of the thing of trying to start is trying to convince your parents that this is what you're going to do.
And how were they receptive to that?
They were great because I think because I'd started doing a couple of professional gigs when I was young. They had some eyes onto it, but they, you know, they're still worried on some level that their kid is going to go into something that's really unstable, right? Um, and a lot of the kids around me that I was at school with, they were looking to do something that was more mainstream, right? They're going on to try and be lawyers or doctors or whatever. The list goes
Right.
on. But I I think it was, you know, one of my last kind of like school plays or youth theatre things when I was about 17, 18, when my parents realized like, oh, other people think he's good at this. It's not just us being proud parents, being proud of
Yeah.
our boy. Like maybe he can actually do this. Um, but the thing that kind of sealed the deal for them at that stage was me leaving school and getting a place to getting a place in drama school at RADA, which is the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art in the UK, because that's when it was like, oh, okay, this institution is legit and competitive. The fact that he got in might mean that he has a shot at this thing, and so that was the real blessing moment, I think, for me.
And did you do a cattle call of like Guildhall, Rada, Lambda,
Yeah,
and
yeah. Did
did you get into any others or
I remember my first year because also it's quite an expensive
yeah, it's
endeavor
like
applying to
150
drama schools.
quid to do an application, right?
Yeah, exactly. And when I was applying, it was a little bit cheaper at the time. I think things have just gradually gone up and up. But even then, I was applying to universities and stuff to do other types of courses. There was a time when I was thinking maybe I might go to university and read history
Wow.
because I'm a big kind of history nut. But I knew really deep down I was like, this is what I want to do. And I kind of went and auditioned at RADA. That was the kind of first one. And because I'd done some other gigs beforehand, I wasn't really sure if I wanted to do like a whole undergraduate thing or if I wanted to do a short course and try and get out there. So I did the foundation course at RADA. And then I realized that was that. And that's like 2 terms, like 2 semesters from like September to Easter. And then after that, I was like, I need to come back. Like, this is exactly what I want to do.
And does the
And so I applied.
foundation, I'm sorry to interrupt, does the foundation
No,
course
no,
secure you a spot in Rada?
not at all. So I had to
Wow.
reapply, and I was fortunate enough to get in that year. I also applied to other schools like Lambda and Guildhall and so on, and Bristol or Vic, and a couple of them didn't take me. But rather because I'd already spent some time there, I knew that that's where I already felt like I was at home. So I was very fortunate that they took me on again. And then I did the 3 years there. And so by the time I left, which was 2017, I was 22. By the time I left, I'd been there for about 4 years. So yeah,
Wow.
it's
And,
intense.
and how was the experience of Rada? You know, because I know it's our equivalent of Juilliard, Yale, NYU. You know,
Exactly.
how was the conservatory? A lot of Shakespeare, a lot of
Mhm.
contemporary, movement. I imagine as well. Did you enjoy the
Yeah,
training?
I had a great time. I mean, basically given this, the course itself has so much to offer, um, in terms of what you're doing, that voice, movement, acting, fight, all of this stuff that you're doing. That I really, really, really loved it. But I did find at the end of my time there that it was, and maybe it was because I was there for 4 years instead of 3. I don't really know, but by the time I left, I knew that it was time to just go and like try and see what happens out there, because as rigorous as the training is, as intense as it is, as brilliant as it is, you are also in a bubble. And it's like, it's like if you were to make a movie and you just keep doing reshoots and you decide you're
Yeah.
never actually going to let it come out. At some point you have to go.
Yeah.
um and so I had a fantastic time there, that I was surrounded by, you know, teachers and staff that are at the top of their game and have been teaching the greats for generations. And I was with a particular set of students that were also incredibly gifted. Um,
You felt comfortable with
and
your fellow students because
yeah,
the group can make or break the experience. I know, you
I
know.
think I think that I think that's part of the secret, really, is that you don't know that until you're in it, because you get in off of your own merit and luck and all of these other things. But at some point, you have to fit in as part of a company. They
Yeah.
choose you as a good fit for that specific group. So if you don't get in that year, that might not be a reflection on whether you're right or not for the school. It might just be that it's about the cohort of those group of students they're putting together.
And
Um, and yeah,
culturally, I'm curious. I've always wanted to ask, and I hope you don't mind me asking. If not, we can
mm,
delete this. But in America, I think because ego is such a like ingrained part of our culture, it can be quite
sure,
competitive with people in the group.
yeah.
Was it like that there, or were you guys supportive and there to lift each other
Uh,
up?
I think I was fortunate enough that I was in a year group that was incredibly supportive of one another.
That's
But
them.
you
It's
can't
amazing.
bank on that in, yeah, but you can't bank on that in any situation, whether it's cultural differences within countries or whatever. Like, it just depends on the goodwill of the people involved. And I happened to be with a group of people that all really cared about each other. That might not be the case in a different year at a different school. It doesn't really matter. But at the same time, they can't help but be a sort of competitive edge at some stages, because, with all the love in the world, you could be with your best friend and then you get presented with a play where you both want the same role, right?
Yeah.
Like that thing is bound to happen. um what I was fortunate enough in my year was is that, that was always a short-term thing, and that never actually made any sort of real damage.
Right.
um I think the competitiveness was one of, if someone ups their game, it's up to you to match that and keep leveling each other up, rather than, beating each other into the ground. Um, which I imagine kind of can be the case.
And
Um,
and in
yeah.
summers, here in America, we used to have a thing called summer stock where people would go and do theaters. What would you guys do during your summers off? Would you try to get agents and audition for legit things or, you
So
know,
the way that it works, I think with most actor training schools in the UK, I can't speak for all of them, but at least for rather at my time, and I think most schools operate like this, is if you're doing a 3-year course, which is the standard, the agent thing and the outside thing doesn't become part of it until your final year.
in the
So you're
showcase?
really, yeah, the
Yeah.
showcases, and also you do kind of graduate shows which people come invited to. But those first 2 years, or the first year, if you're on a 2-year course or whatever, um, that first 2/3 of your course is very sheltered, and it's about you acting with your people, with those staff, working together, and then suddenly the outside world comes in, and that's when things kind of are opened up. Um, and so, yeah, in our summers off, we would basically just take a break because
Yeah, just
because
be able
our
to breathe.
yeah, because
Yeah.
our hours were so intense, and I'm sure you have the same thing over in the States. Like, you're working at very least a nine
Eight.
to five, kind of six
Yeah.
days a week. Like, do you know what I mean?
Plus
And so
rehearsal, plus,
exactly,
yeah, yeah.
it's a really, really kind of rigorous process. Um, and it isn't for everyone. So, if it is something that you want to do, you the weird thing is that people don't really realize until it's happening the kind of strange sacrifices that you make even as a student, because your friends that maybe from high school or whatever are like, oh, hey, you're around on Tuesday, and they're at university doing something else, and you go, I'm not around, and they're like, why, what could you possibly be doing? And I'm like, dude, I'm just not
Zonked.
available ever.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they're like, well, what are you doing then? I'm like, oh, well, I've got to fight with swords today. And they go, that sounds stupid. And you're like, no, but it's my job. Like, so you're kind of, you do have to really commit to that thing for that length of time. And it isn't For people who don't do this, it sounds kind of ridiculous, but I think once you're in it, you understand. Like, you have to fully commit to the process while it's happening. And that applies to your drama training. And I think if you do that, you're very well prepared for work in the future, because it's the same thing.
Yeah.
It just doesn't, like, often most jobs, you're not doing it consistently for 3 years. You won't be doing it for 3, 6 months.
Totally.
Um,
And
so yeah, but it's that thing.
and I'm curious, because I think everyone kind of has this misconception that, British actors are so naturally good at Shakespeare because of the accent and the Elizabethan roots. When it got to that
Mm,
section of Rada, how was that experience for you? Was that something you were naturally interested in? Or, because
dude, I'm
iambic
so
is
glad you
is a
asked that.
new animal.
Yeah, well, dude, I'm so glad you asked that, actually, because when auditioning to most schools, at least in the UK, you show up with your audition, you have a couple of monologues, right? Or maybe a scene. So, like, for us, it's normally a classical monologue, which normally is Shakespeare,
Yeah.
because you have to really know your stuff to pick a classical speech from that
And
era that isn't Shakespeare.
in verse as well, I imagine they want it.
Yes,
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
typically want it in verse. They probably don't want prose. So you pick something that's in verse, probably Shakespeare, and you pick. And also, like, you're talking young people. Normally, like, they probably don't even know all the Shakespeare plays. So you're probably picking something from, like, the
Romeo,
7 plays
Hamlet,
you've heard about.
Othello.
Yeah,
Yeah.
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 You're picking from the ones you've heard
Yeah.
about,
Yeah.
or maybe the ones that you've seen or studied in school. But, like, you're doing that, and you're doing a modern speech. And I knew that when it came to the modern stuff, I was like, oh, this is acting. This kind of makes sense to me. And then when it came to Shakespeare, there was a while where everything I was doing on stage was just about me trying to remember what the next thing was to say.
Yeah. It's
Do you know
hard
what I
to
mean?
memorize when it's just
Yeah,
it's like Yoda, they
yeah.
speak.
It's a
Yeah.
whole,
Yeah.
yeah. Like, you really have to just know it. And when it came, and when I was auditioning, I remember kind of going, oh, I feel like I kind of get this, not even get it, but I was like, I know that I'm intrigued by this thing and that I want to do more of it, and I'm not going to be scared by it, because some actors, they're made to do Shakespeare, but it's just not what they're interested in.
Yeah.
And so they're like, okay, well, I have to do this thing. Whereas I was like, oh no, I think I might be able to do that, which took me by surprise, because also, at least when I was coming out, I think today, especially in Shakespeare, casting is a bit more open.
Yeah.
You can go and see a Romeo and Juliet where both Romeo and Juliet are women, for instance, and
Totally.
nobody bats an eyelid, right? Whereas if you're going to do an Arthur Miller play, and you know, if dad is white and son is Asian, some people go, "Well, that isn't real," and you're like, "Well, it's a piece of theatre. Like, grow up."
Yeah.
But whereas with Shakespeare, it's really open, and I was like, "Oh, this is great," because originally I was like, "Well, there's Othello for me, and who else?" Right? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I didn't really see that there was a place for me in that. And then
Is
once
that
I
the
got
piece you
into
did,
it,
Othello?
no, not even.
Oh,
I
oh.
ended up doing. I did some of the other kind of kings. I went for Henry V. I went for Richard II, and I didn't even really know those plays well enough. I was like, they're like, "What's the story?" And I was like, "The king says some stuff, and some people die, and
Yeah.
then people clap at the end." But like now, like I read up. I really read, like, my time in Rod. I read up on all the plays, and I loved them, and I found, like, how some of those plays are kind of the root of so many other stories we tell today. Like, case in point, obvious example, West Side Story is Romeo and Juliet. Um, Another one I like to say to people is, I'm like, The Lion King is actually Hamlet with a happy ending. Um,
Totally.
like, those things are really, like, exciting to
Succession
me.
is an amalgamation of
Yeah,
so yeah, yeah.
exactly. You're completely on the money. So I really enjoyed that stuff, and then found that when I left drama school, the first jobs I was getting were all Shakespeare gigs. And I was like, how did I become the Shakespeare guy? Like, I really didn't expect that,
Yeah.
because I'd gone from someone who went, okay, I think I've learned 7 lines out of 10, but I'm struggling with the last three, and I don't really know what that metaphor means. And is it that thing where I have to say those 8 lines in one breath? What's the deal with that? Whereas now I'm like, if I can understand it, that's 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 I've succeeded. So once you know it, then the play and the fun comes in how you're going to do it.
Yeah.
Because also, Shakespeare can be done any sorts of ways. Like, you can literally put those plays in any concept at any time, film, theatre, whatever, and there's possibilities. Whereas there's some things where you go like, I don't know, like if we decide to set this thing in this time period, you've really got to work to make it happen. But with Shakespeare, literally the possibilities are endless. And so suddenly I was like, this is a whole world that I could just live in for years.
Yeah.
And I kind of did. Yeah.
And was that, enjoyable for you, because
Yeah, dude, I
I
loved
think
it.
everyone gets out of school and they're like, all right, well, I want to audition for TV and film. And then you get pulled into the Shakespeare direction, which is great because you're working, but it's a bit
Yeah.
different than, the stereotypical expectations out of drama school.
Yeah, dude. I mean, like in a way, even up to this point, I've kind of ended up on that trail whereby I do a couple of, I did a couple of Shakespeare plays kind of back to back, or I did like three within 2 years. So it still kind of feels like it's the majority of your work. And I was like, oh, what if like other actor friends I know, like they get to be like a guy wearing a t-shirt who has an iPhone as opposed to wearing the cape and having a sword.
Yeah.
And I'm used to being the guy with the cape and the sword. And I go, maybe I should do the other thing. But even now, lots of the other work I do that isn't classical in any means, really, like still has that kind of pomp and circumstance, or it has that kind of scale to it that basically has meant that doing the Shakespeare thing has put me in great stead to basically go anywhere else.
Well, I'm really glad you said that because that's a reoccurring question I ask every actor on the show is, obviously sometimes it can happen in drama school and sometimes it happens in work and finding your voice and finding your confidence, both of those. Do
Mm.
you feel like that happened in those Shakespeare works where you really felt like,
Oh yeah, yeah. Because also, like, let's be honest. There's always, especially in England, there's a very loyal kind of theatre going audience, probably of a certain age as
totally.
well, and they typically really know their shit, right? Like, if I were to say a Shakespearean joke, which is an outdated joke from 400 years ago or more, that is about some lady and this thing and this word that doesn't make any sense, and there's an older person in the audience who laughs out loud, I know that if I say that wrong, there's someone going to go, you did that wrong. But also, what's that got to do with anything, really? Because
Yeah,
it's about like you've got to remake the play for today, otherwise why are you putting it on? Like
totally.
whenever I've been doing Macbeth or Midsummer Night's Dream or Julius Caesar or any of those shows, there has never we've never just been the only one of those on. Like when I was doing Midsummer Night's Dream in 2019, we were one of three productions on in London within like a 5 mile radius. Like you could choose to go
Wow.
see anyone. So you've got to really be sure about why you're doing that play,
Yeah,
and you've really got to like make it for an audience, whichever audience you're making it for. You've got to make it relevant for people. Otherwise, just do something else.
that's beautifully
And
put.
so yeah, I mean, but I think it's true because if you were to ask me today, hey Kit, do you want to come and do the Shakespeare play? I will be that annoying person who will go, but why are we doing it?
Yeah. No,
or
it's a
like,
fair
or like,
question.
what's the plan? Because
Yeah.
you might want to do something because it's cool, and that's great. But will other people think it's cool? Because if you want people to come because it's cool, it better be cool.
Yeah.
But otherwise, you might probably want a deeper reason as to why you're putting that on. Because also the text is tricky, so why would people listen or care?
Yeah, no, that's beautifully put, and I appreciate that. And in Caesar, you got to work with Ben Whishaw, right? How was that?
Yeah. Oh, and that was amazing. Because also like that show, so that show was crazy because I was in my final year at RADA, and the director Sir Nicholas Heitner, who used to run the National Theatre for 10 years and launched a bunch of careers, like he did History Boys and he did the original Miss Saigon and all this stuff. And he was starting this new theatre, the Bridge Theatre, and he asked me to come and be in that show. And I knew that it was going to be Ben Whishaw and Michelle Fairley, from who was still hot off of Game of Thrones at the time, and David Morrissey, who was hot off of The Walking Dead. And I was like, how am I in this show? And the crazy thing was is that the theatre wasn't even built yet. Like I got the gig, and then there were 9 months we had to wait for the theatre to be built before we did the show.
Wow.
Um, and I went into that, and I was just kind of stunned as like a new kid on the block. Like how am I even in this room with these people who are all pros and are all known for being brilliant in several different things? And the tricky thing for me was kind of walking onto that stage in front of 1,000 people every day, Or then when we did the National Theatre Live production and there were millions of people watching around the world, is to be able to go out onto that stage and feel like I have a right to be here. Like I have just as much of a right to be here as people like Ben Whishaw do. And all of those kind of those guys that were on that show were really good at making all of us younger cats kind of feel like they really gave us the platform to be welcome.
Totally.
And like I had that for the first couple of years on a lot of my jobs where I was kind of like the youngest on a job or like the newest on a job, and it's all about people kind of offering each other the space to do your thing. And if someone gives me the green light to be like, you know what, this, don't doubt yourself, go out there and have a good time. And that's kind of all you need.
Yeah.
And then after the show's done, when the adrenaline goes down and you go over to see your mum or your dad or whatever, and they go, did you like it? And let them be the person going, holy cow, you were on stage with that person. You go, oh yeah, that's true. That just happened.
Totally.
And
And it
I think,
must elevate your game being with that amazing of actors,
completely.
Yeah.
Well,
'Cause
you learn so much by osmosis. I think, at drama school in training, you're very, very aware all the time of like the things that you might be learning or the things you're meant to be learning, because that's why you're there. Whereas like when you're doing a job, you're like, the job is to execute the demands of the job.
yeah.
And then at the end of it, you go, oh, as a kind of weird subconscious byproduct, I've actually learned loads from like watching these amazing people do their thing and seeing how they respond, especially in theatre, see how different they are each day. Like if you see your favorite actor on stage on a Saturday night when it's amazing, great for you. But also, if you see them on a Tuesday when they're like recovering from an illness and still trying to make it work and they're still amazing, isn't that a really interesting thing to try and work out?
Totally.
And so, as a cast member, you get the benefit of seeing all of those experiences and also experiencing them yourself. Because I grew up wanting to be an actor because I thought it was fun and having a great time doing it and being interested in trying to tell stories. But also, I used to do it part time, whereby I get to do it Saturday afternoon or on a Friday night, and that was always great. So when you start doing it as a job, you have that transition from hobby to job where you go, oh, it's Tuesday, I really don't feel like it.
Some
And
days
your
you don't
job
want
is
to
to show
act.
up and still do it. Yeah,
Yeah.
you got to show up and do it. And that's a really amazing learning curve. And if you see someone you admire, like a Ben Whishaw or whoever, you see them show up on a Monday, Tuesday, whatever it is, and you see them nail it and kill it, you can't help but want to match it. Doesn't matter if you have 10 lines, 100 lines, one line, doesn't matter. But like my impetus is like, well, I better show up too.
Yeah.
And so like you end up learning loads.
That's beautiful. And I imagine a production that big and like you said, it got produced and seen. Did that open, a lot of different eyes to your work and people coming to see the show and, put you on
Yeah,
radars that perhaps might not have happened right
I think
away?
I, th- I think so. I mean, it's a little bit like I think naturally as actors, part of the reason we're even having this chat, I imagine, is that we're trying to enlighten other actors because largely as actors we live in the dark.
Yeah.
We live in a place of kind of not knowing stuff, right? You're all kind of trying to call up your agent or whatever, being like, "Is there anything because you might know because I don't?" Like, and you're talking to your friends, going, "Have you heard? Have you heard?" Because often we don't know stuff, and I think I did walk into rooms where I got used to being like introducing myself for the first time. And then there were a couple of times where I'd walk into a room and they go, no, 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 we know who you are. We saw you in the thing. And I'm like, oh, you did? And then immediately I'm like, but did you like it? And like,
Yeah.
and you got to kind of like, get around it in whatever way that works for you. But it was a slower kind of build whereby there's a momentum you can get where work begets work. And that's a really lovely thing. But also you have to, I think I try to walk into every room assuming that people haven't come across me before, because otherwise you're just that guy who's
Yeah.
like, well, are you familiar with my work? And like nobody wants that guy around. But like I think, yeah, I started to kind of gain a very small reputation, not as necessarily an actor that people would know or thought was any good per se, but really as an actor who was dependable, and that like if you cast me, if you literally decide to pay me money to do a job, you can bet that I'm going to show up and give you my all.
Yeah.
I think that was the reputation I was starting to build in theatre. Was like, you go like, oh well, we've got our main cast, but we don't have someone for this part. Kit, and that kind of became that was where that's how I started being on people's radar. I think, I hope. Um, and yeah, that's it's a very kind of weird thing, because really what I'm saying is, as things started to build, I still don't actually know the answers why. So it's my own way of making sense of it, because it's other people in rooms that you never go into who make decisions. And like, we're not after you have an audition and the casting director says goodbye, we don't know what conversations are happening behind.
Yeah.
You don't know all the conversations you're having with your agents are having, and so on. So you try and piece it together for yourself. But for me, I assumed that the reputation I was building was one of someone who they go like, that guy tries hard.
So
He's quite good at that, but also like, if you ask him to do something, he's probably going to do it to the best of his ability.
and then
Yeah,
when did the film and TV circuit start really opening up its way? Was Shadow and Bone the first really big thing for you, or?
yeah. That was. I mean, like, so as I was going through theatre and doing Shakespeare and all that kind of good stuff, I was doing Midsummer Night's Dream, and this audition came through for Shadow and Bone. And up until that point, I'd come down to like the final two to play a bunch of different roles, leading, supporting, and a bunch of different shows that just, in the end, just didn't go my way. And a bunch of ones that were really crushing too, because I was that close.
Yeah, I know the feeling.
Um, yeah, and then Shadow and Bone came along, and it was actually quite funny because my first audition for it, I was up for this character Mal, who's the romantic lead, who my friend Archie plays, and it was probably the worst audition of my life. Like, I massively screwed it up.
Self tape or in
I also
person?
in person, so
Wow.
extra embarrassment.
Yeah.
Um, and so I really, really screwed it up, and I got the vibe wrong, and I think they misread me. It was a whole, like, everything about it just wasn't quite matching. No kind of like malintent, but I left that audition basically being like, well, screw that job. And I was like, bye, Shadow and Bone, never think about you again. And everyone I knew was up for it in some capacity. Um, it was because they were trying to cast all the men roles. And then it was months later, I was doing Midsummer Night's Dream, and uh, a couple of the execs happened to come and see the show. And the next day they were like, oh, come in for this character Jesper. And I looked at the brief and I went, oh, wait, this character I'm way more down to play. Went in for that, and then I did recall after recall after recall, a couple of chemistry reads, and then they called me. And I knew the day they called me, it was I did my final round on a Friday. Knew typically in the UK at least, or wherever, you don't really hear anything over the weekend. So I was like, I'm going to hear on Monday, because on Monday it's 2 weeks till the job starts. So they've got to make a decision on who they want.
Wow.
Monday morning, I got a call from my agent, and they're like, it's happening. And it was like, pack up your life and move to Budapest. That was what was happening. And I had 1 week left of Midsummer Night's Dream. So I finished up the show, started to meet everyone who was on the job. And then I had 1 week between finishing my theatre show and moving to Budapest to start shooting a show that I didn't really even know what I was doing. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
I'd spent so long in the theatre atmosphere that I really didn't know enough about the screen thing. I walked in and I
Does
was
RADA
pretending.
have that as part of their program now as we're
It
moving?
is,
You,
it is part of their program, but the large focus is on the theatre training
okay.
course, because largely I think everything comes from that. So
Okay.
yeah, it was more of a theatre training course, but also all of my work for the previous 2 years really mainly had been theatre.
Yeah.
I'd spent like a week on a set, and then 4 months in the theatre, and then another 3 days on a set, and then 6 months in the theatre. So I felt really out of my depth moving to a foreign country I'd never been to, and now I'm going to shoot a show for 6 months.
Wow.
So it was kind of wild.
That's so beautiful. And when you got there on a set that's, almost Game of Thrones money equivalent, how did that
Yeah.
feel to just be on something so epically, no, no dollar spare?
Yeah, I mean, it was great, and it was cool, and it was exciting. And this is pre-COVID, so no one's worrying about anything yet. But this was like 2019, somewhere in 2019, we went out there. And what was really nice about it was similar to the thing I've talked to you about when it comes to like drama schools and the people that you're with. There were 6 of us that were the leads that showed up together, one of whom, Mr. Ben Bonds, had been around the block before, so he knew what was going on. But the
Yeah.
other 5 of us, we were all pretty green. I'd probably say I was one of the greenest. but we all experienced it together. And so throughout this crazy experience, we were walking onto this set of this magical world that has been built out of, you know, from a book, um, and then is being brought to life. We had each other to turn around to and go, "Holy shit, is this really happening?"
Yeah.
Um, and so that was the thing that kind of anchored us, because we did have like the big book fandom, and they were very kind of they were anticipating everything. So there was a little bit of a pressure to do it right, or at least not do it wrong. But really, you know, I was incredibly supported by everyone who was leading us, our directors and showrunners and writers and producers and so on, and the other cast members. So I felt like when people went, Kit, now it's your turn to do your thing, I felt comfortable to step in and do it as best I could, and with as most kind of like cocksure energy and whatever, and the gunslinging and all of it, and just like throw everything to the wall and see what sticks. And
Wow.
I'm just glad that some of it did.
It totally did. And I mean, speaking of pun intended, was that your first time doing green screen work? You know,
Oh yeah, yeah.
how
First
is it?
time.
I mean, I imagine the theater training helped for that, but was that weird navigating, you know?
Yeah, yeah. The theatre training definitely helps, because you just have to imagine stuff that isn't there anyway. You know, in a four wall space, one of the walls is the audience, so you already have to imagine that. But it was quite strange being in a train carriage, pretending to shoot lots of beasts that are trying to get you, and you're like, what am I responding to? And it's like a member of the crew who's just shouting instructions at you.
Yeah.
Like it's like they're just shouting stuff from the script, like it's stage direction. They're like, monster one, monster two, and I've got to really place it in my head how those elements come together as we go. And you know, you're always going to be helped by the edit, you know,
Yeah.
because people will shoot it in a number of ways that you can feel like whatever you do, we've got it. But for me, being a coming through theatre where you have to do your own continuity and you have to do it in order and make sure you've got it right all the time, I wanted to make sure I was as prepared as possible. Um, but also, when you walk in, you can't be worrying about everything. You just have to like do the thing when asked. If the take is three, two, one, action, cut, you need to make sure that that small time has something going on.
Yeah.
Um, and so that was that for me. That entire experience, as wonderful as it was like a big trial and error. And like there are things that when I look back on it, I go, that worked. I can keep that. That didn't work so well for me. I want to work on that. Um, that's the benefit of screens, that you can look back on it, but also watching yourself is a whole other problem.
Yeah.
You know,
Well, I know
yeah, it's a
well.
whole other thing.
So
Yeah,
season one was really your film school, so to speak.
exactly that.
Yeah.
Literally exactly that. Yeah,
That's beautiful, man. And
yeah,
so then talk to me, obviously everyone has dealt with this in some way. The pandemic happens and it kind of shifts all our
yeah.
lives. How do you navigate that? I mean, I imagine maybe you had a few jobs that were going to go that went on hold or
Well, no, well, actually the opposite. So I moved back to London a week before the world ended. Like we were literally having our like farewell wrap party in Budapest for the end of season one. And we were like, have you heard that Tom Cruise has been flown out of Italy for some reason? And like we were like, apparently there's some crazy stuff going on in Europe. And we had no idea it was COVID. And then like literally within 2 weeks, the world was shut down.
yeah.
And so I moved back to London. I immediately kind of like quarantined, and then it was quiet for a while, like from March till uh August. For me it was quiet, and then I was very fortunate in that some things started to open up again, and I booked a film for September of 2020, and I did this film in Scotland. It's called The Origin. It just had its premiere at the London Film Festival. It's a horror film
Horror
where it's just,
thriller, right? Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
and it's just six people, and so it was a really small crew. We were all bubbled together, very very remote. That was my first experience of like bubbling in COVID, and being isolated from everyone. And we shot that movie in just 6 weeks,
Wow.
which was so different from what I'd experienced obviously on Shadow Bone, which is over 6 months. And then I came back into more quarantining, and then I booked the School for Good and Evil, which kind of was the beginning of 2021.
And how did that
Um,
feel? Did book something with Charlize, Kate, Lawrence? I mean, so many.
yeah, I mean, that was crazy because also when I booked the job, they hadn't told me that those guys were all in it.
Oh, no
Like,
way.
yeah, yeah. So I auditioned for this movie that I confess I didn't know much about. I knew it
It
was
was a
based on
secretive
a book.
audition.
Yeah, but I
Yeah.
didn't really know much of anything, and they didn't give me the script. I just got given some sides that were from like the end of the movie. So you're looking at like I genuinely don't know what's going on because I feel like I needed to have read or seen something to know what I'm meant to be talking about. Um, but I read for it, and my first audition, I was still shooting this horror film, so I didn't look great. Like I had a terrible haircut, I had like scraggly hair, and I was like always in the rain. And the brief for the School for Good and Evil said handsome, and I was like, well, this ain't gonna work.
Yeah.
I was like, there's no way this is gonna happen. But for some
Well, you're a
reason,
handsome man, I gotta say. For all the ladies, they'll
thank
be
you.
mad at me if I don't say it.
That's very kind of you. But
And
I
gentlemen,
yeah,
and you know.
but yeah, I auditioned for it, and then I met Mr. Paul Feig, who directed the movie,
Were you aware
and
of
then when they
his
off,
iconic
yeah, oh
status?
yeah,
Oh, yeah, okay.
I was very very aware of him, and but again, my first meeting was very strange because it was COVID, so he was like behind a screen, and it was a whole thing, and then I walked away from the audition, and I was like, I don't really know if that's gonna work or if I'm the guy you're even looking for, to be fair. Because the character in the book is also described as like super pale skin, blonde hair, blue eyes, and I was like, I don't look like
Yeah.
that. But I ended up they offered me the role ish, um, because they needed to find the older version of me who was played by Mr. Lawrence Fishburne, and I had no idea because I still didn't have the script. So like, we need to find the older you, and I was like, oh, okay, like how old? And they're like, well, we're thinking like Lawrence Fishburne, and I was like, what?
Yeah.
And I had no idea. And then I started panicking, like, oh, okay, am I doing the wrong accent? Like, because I'm assuming he's gonna
Yeah,
do
I gotta
his.
match. Right, right.
Yeah, because I'm assuming like they've cast me first because they've optioned me as the villain for this movie, and I wanted to do the movie because most movies of that genre don't have villains my age. Like
Yeah.
I'm 28. I was 26 when we shot it, and most villains I'm thinking of, is Voldemort or Vader or something. It's like someone who's more of a father figure. So I was like, if you're offering me this, I 100% want to do it. But I didn't expect that there was this other scale to it. I'd heard about the two Sophias, the two young leads being cast, but I didn't know about Charlize or Kerry or Lawrence or Michelle Yeoh or anyone yet. Um, and then when I realized that, I was like, oh my gosh, like again, similar to that theater thing with Ben Wisher, I was like, how am I here? Like, how am I in this room with these
Yeah.
people? And I've got to be the bad guy of the movie. I've got to be like the most
Well, and
terrifying
that
thing in it.
opening scene is so epic. I mean,
It's nuts. Yeah.
what one? I mean, one in a million actors are lucky to get something that epic. How did it feel to shoot something like that?
Well, dude, so like, I mean, for those of you who haven't seen it, this is a scene where I play these two ancient wizards, a good brother and an evil brother. It's like Dumbledore and Voldemort fighting, or it's like
Yeah,
Sith versus Jedi.
but it opens the
Um,
movie. It's not at the end
but
of
it
the.
opens the movie. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. But no,
yeah.
but dude, this is the crazy thing. So originally that wasn't in the script. Everything was a mystery, and then it was that sequence was a reshoot. So we shot that in Budapest because I
Again,
was doing
no
Shadow. Because I
way.
was doing yeah, because I was already doing Shadow and Bone
Ah,
season two.
got
Doing
it.
season two. So it was earlier this year. I wasn't able to leave because they're both Netflix. They managed to work it out. But they came down and they flew out the crew there, and I was put through stunt rehearsals, all this stuff. And because I was already playing Rafal, the villain of the movie, they were like, "Do we want an identical twin to play the good one, or do we cast someone else?" And it was a whole thing. And I was like, "I'm pretty sure I can do it. I'm pretty sure I can do young Fishburne by now. I know him quite well by now." And they were like, "Okay, you do it, but also that changes how you're going to shoot it."
Yeah,
Because it means like you just have to shoot everything twice, really.
right.
And I have to do twice the work. Like I've done a lot of fight choreography, but I've never had to learn both sides of a fight. I've never
Totally.
had
I didn't even
to
think
like
about that.
yeah, like to do everything twice to like do the dialogue in an American accent and then 7 hours later come back and do the British version.
While
Like
balancing
it was
another
very
show, right?
exactly, yeah. Like it was
Yeah,
like Monday,
yeah,
Tuesday on this,
yeah,
Wednesday go back to Jesper on Shadow and Bone, come back. It was the most mental experience I've ever had. But it was amazing.
yeah.
It was
Well,
very
now
hard to
there's nothing
explain.
you can't do, you know?
Well, yeah, but like
Yeah.
it was so hard to explain to people until they've now seen it, which is great now that people have seen it. Because beforehand, it was just like, people are like, "What are you talking about?" I'm like, "Don't worry, you'll get it in a year when it comes out." Like, you
Yeah.
have that thing where you can't quite connect with people in a way until they experience it too. Um, but yeah, that
How's
shoot
that
was
felt for you, having
mental.
the world see it now? I mean, it must be so cool. And your
Yeah, I mean,
DMs must be amazing, you know?
yeah, I mean, it's great, man. But I'm just great. Here's my thing. Like when it comes to anything I've made, I'm kind of just glad if people watch it, let alone if they like it.
Right.
Um, because I've got lots of lovely friends, some of which are actors, and they're all very clued into how things work. But for like my friends and family who don't do this, they might be like, "Oh, I saw that thing you did," and I'll assume it's the latest thing, and they've just discovered something from years ago. And so I have to. I'm just glad if people just check it out.
Yeah.
But if people like it, and then on top of that, if they reach out to then share the fact that they've enjoyed it, that means the world to me. Because all the extra stuff from people you don't know, strangers, fans, whoever, who might engage with you on social media, that's very, very, very lovely.
Yeah.
But and that's great. It's like, oh, great, cool, we did something cool, and I'm glad it's had a response and it's made an effect on you, and I'm glad that you were engaging with it. But if it's a family member who like really gives their appreciation, that's the stuff that will make you cry.
Yeah.
And so like there's levels to this thing, but it's a huge relief when the thing finally comes out and people can watch it, because on two levels. One, you can stop being that annoying guy around the dinner table saying, this one time when I was fighting myself in this
Right.
epic battle thing, and they're just like, oh, this again. But also it's proof of of uh not just your work but also your life, because
Yeah.
we live this stuff. It's so wrapped up into who we are as people when we're doing it, that you can look at it and go like, in a weird way, you can kind of go back and go, that was me in 2021. Like you can kind of look at it and go like, and I'm glad that you can now engage with that thing. And but also I get to leave it behind now that it's yours, it's not mine anymore. I get to move on and be Kit again and just be me, and then move on to whatever the next thing might be.
That's so beautiful, man, and I'm so proud of you. Your work is exceptional, and
Thank
to
you.
kind of wrap things up. I don't know how much you could talk, but let's talk
Mm,
about what's next. Obviously, you got Shadow and Bone season two,
yeah,
and then you got
yeah,
incredible soccer movie with Michael Ward coming
yeah,
out.
yeah,
Right? Have you
yeah.
started that
That's
yet?
So we shot that directly after I did School for Good and Evil. So that was this time last year.
Okay.
We shot that movie in Rome and then a little bit in London, and it's a beautiful. It's a film called the Beautiful Game, and it's about this group of lads who are homeless. It's based on a true thing called the Homeless World Cup, whereby this organization collects homeless people from all over the world, and they do a World Cup football tournament every year in a major city across the world. It's fantastic because it's about the England team, so we're all actors going to try and win this thing. We all have different problems. One of our characters is like an ex-heroin addict. I play an ex-alcoholic. There's a gambling addict. It's really beautiful. And Bill Nye plays our coach, which is,
Never
beautiful
heard
and
of him.
amazing.
I'm just kidding.
but what was really great is we shot it with the real homeless World Cup teams. So we had like the American team and the Italian team, and it was really, really fantastic. So that will be coming out next year. And then Shadow and Bone season 2 comes out early next year, I've been told, but I'm not entirely sure about the dates yet. Um, but sometime in 2023. And it's a huge show now. Like I
Yeah.
think after the success of the first season, um, people got really, really excited about the show, and there's so much more story to tell off of Lee Bardugo's amazing books. But the show's got bigger. We've got brand new cast, and we just had so much fun this season, and I am particularly excited for people to watch this season because I think we get to not only make the world bigger, but we go much deeper into the characters too.
Yeah.
Because adventure's great, adventure's fun, action sequences and all the like romance and all that stuff. But I think once you get to dive into character development, that's the really juicy stuff.
That's so beautiful, man. I can't wait to check it
Yeah.
out. And I'm curious now, with all this incredible success you're having, any desire to return to the theater anytime soon?
I am gagging to get back on stage, man. Like I really, really want
You
to.
should come to Broadway. We should do a show together.
Oh my gosh, I'd
Yeah.
love that.
Yeah. Yeah. It'd
Yeah,
be
let me
so
know when and
fun.
I'll be there.
Yeah.
I mean, theatre. The only reason I haven't done it sooner has been I've been fortunate enough to be
Yeah.
otherwise engaged, or COVID was a big deal because after season one of Shadow and Bone, I came back thinking I'd love to do a play now, and then obviously all the theaters closed.
Right.
But literally, as soon as someone gives me the green light to go and do a play, I will be there
Yeah.
because I really do miss it, and it's just a very different experience having that immediate experience with your co-stars, with the crew around you, with the audience. That's where the magic really happens.
So
So
true.
yeah, yeah.
And final question, man. I ask every actor
Mm.
this, and I know it's not an easy one, but
Hmm.
it's no secret that we live in a really weird time in the world, politically, socially,
Hmm.
and uh for all the actors out there listening that are struggling and just got out of this pandemic and are really trying to pursue this, any words of wisdom you might have for them?
Oh wow.
Sorry, I know it's heavy.
No, 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 no. But it's a good question though. I mean, I'm not sure if I can offer kind of necessarily wisdom, but I think the really important thing is, and I found it hard myself. I've struggled this myself actually, but staying in contact with people who matter to you, because and it's especially hard with COVID, I think, because we've all got very distant from things and from people, and but I found like the need to reach out to people is really, really important because you might be going through a lot, and that's very normal and all very fair, but also the person next to you probably also is too. And I think reaching out to people who might be needing your help is probably one of the best ways to enrich their lives, but also yours. Because there's always going to be someone worse off than you,
Yeah.
and someone who really, really needs something. Maybe not always from you, but it can't hurt to try and help them quite often, I believe. And I found that some of the greatest surprises in my life have come from the people that I didn't expect to walk into it.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, so I'd say keeping those contacts with people and really kind of letting new experiences with new people really affect you. I think it is that's the real life stuff that outside of always being on screens with each other is really important. So yeah,
That's so beautiful. Get young, man. Thank you for being here. I'm honored to get a chance to talk to you. It means a lot, man, and I'm
my
proud of the
pleasure,
work
man.
you're doing. And I really hope we get a chance to work together and hang one day
That would be
soon,
lovely.
man. And
Yeah,
congratulations on all the epic things. And when one of those next projects coming out, come back and we'll break it down.
yeah. Thank you very much, Ryan. Well, thank you. This has been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah,
And
thank you so
yeah,
much.
strange to be so reflective on everything, actually. But
No,
yeah, there we
man,
go.
it was incredible, and thank you for everything. Kid Young, man,
No problem.
stay safe, be well, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you.